Let's begin, everybody, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Saint Joseph, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Tonight we'll continue on with some of the things we were looking at last week. Remember last week we were looking at the way in which the intimate act between married spouses should be lived, and then the way things can go wrong. We considered, lust within marriage, things that will wound the marital act, including masturbation, all of those kinds of things. We'll continue on with a bit more of that tonight. Then we'll consider some of the teaching of the Pope of how this is to be lived, just to bring some new light to it. Then we'll look at how grace begins to affect all of this area, the sacramental grace of marriage especially. And then I want to have a look at tonight, because we're sort of in the right moment for it, to look at homosexuality and what that is, and I'll give you some light on that from a good Catholic psychologist, and I believe he's right. And then we'll circle back round. Welcome, Sarah. There's 5 handouts there. Yeah. We'll circle back round to what we were finishing off last week, which was some of the beginnings of the pro-life stuff. And last week I had a question from someone regarding IVF and whether it's legitimate. So there's a handout there on that, something I put in the newsletter a few weeks back, just giving the Catholic position on it. So we'll go through that at the very end. So the handouts tonight, this is kind of a recap of the stuff that we've done in previous weeks. That's something I wrote when I was a seminarian, just on all of the stuff of how integration is to occur for the sexual appetite and the passions. This is more of a reflection of what we did in the first weeks of our course, looking at man and woman and all of the reflections we did on the book of Genesis. So it's up to you whether you want to read through those, but they're summaries of what I've already presented. So just for your reference, all these documents, the online cloud that I've set up, I've put up the videos and the MP3s there, so each week they go up. And now I've put in the resource documents, so all the documents that I've done, they're all up there in a folder. And also, when we come to it tonight, when we look at homosexuality, there are 2 videos in a resource folder called Homosexuality by a guy called Dr. Joseph Nicolosi. We'll look at him tonight. So he's got 2 sort of 45-minute videos explaining the causes of homosexuality in men and in women. So that's a reference that you can go further and if you're interested. And I think it's worth it, because it helps being able to explain these things to friends and family when they come up. Just closing out some of our more indelicate topics last week. A few things occurred to me that I think I've presented before in the past, which didn't come into my mind last week, things that I just want to finish off with. John Paul II, and I may have previously remembered to say this, I can't remember, I always get confused what I'm saying in the marriage prep classes and what I say in the other classes. It always crosses over in my mind. But John Paul II, before he wrote and did Theology of the Body, he wrote a book called Love and Responsibility when he was the bishop in Krakow. And it was based on his experience, his pastoral experience. Lots of couples coming to him before the sexual revolution, before everything exploded in the 1960s, but in the 20th century. And he was discovering there were issues within Catholic marriages between spouses. So he was interested in what some of the modern science was saying, some of the sociological sciences, when they were looking into sexuality a bit more. So he does reference it, but he welds it together with some philosophy and then theology. So it's a kind of a mix. But in the course of that book, he does get quite explicit from a Catholic perspective, and he says that because men and women have different rates of arousal, when it comes to spouses coming together, there's a danger for the man to sort of set off at his own pace and not be attentive to what's needed for his wife in her arousal and her enjoyment of the act. And he was saying it's a necessary requirement of the man because his arousal rate goes up very steeply, whereas the woman tends to heat up more slowly. And this is fairly well known, wide sort of general knowledge. He says that the man must pace himself and be attentive to his wife and what she needs for her enjoyment and satisfaction within the act. As they're loving one another, we all know that love must be at the basis of it, the spiritual love, but as they engage their bodies and enjoy the pleasure of it, he has to be attentive and be pacing himself. And if he paces himself in such a way that they generally arrive at climax together, then his effort takes on the quality of an act of virtue. So he's being virtuous when he does that, to control himself. And there he's getting quite explicit. Normally the church doesn't get into this level of advice, but he's aware, obviously, of difficulties in Catholic marriages where there's a danger that the man is a little bit sort of in a silo, and she may not communicate so well to him. He is then trying to give good advice. And he says really the goal is simultaneous climax, which is obviously not going to happen, every time, nor any time. So then that raises another question. And remember last week I gave more of an opinion on a disputed question regarding fellatio. A question has been put to me in the past, and it's come up in other questions, like in Christopher West's book that I mentioned last week. Is it okay that the man, within the context of the foreplay, bring his wife to climax before they complete the act, where he finishes the act in the right way inside his wife? And I think the answer is yes, as long as it's done once again out of an attentiveness and a love. Because the climax of the man is the thing that's key, that the sperm is able to swim to reach the egg. That's the finality, remember it, that instinctive vegetative level that must be open to be achieved. And then obviously the passions being engaged in their right way, that's the satisfaction at the sensitive level, and of course they're coming into a communion to more deeply be together, face one another, etc. So I think as long as things are in the right order within the context of foreplay, and the reason I say this, the reason this question comes up is that some women, the way their body is and the way they fit together with the body of their husband, they may not ever actually come to climax in the context of the act. And I think this is partly because of original sin, that sometimes there's just things don't work out in such a way that she enjoys it as much as him. And then the question arises, is it legitimate that there be the bringing of her body to that point before they complete the act? And I can't see why not, to be honest. And it's not like, remember last week I ruled out any kind of mutual masturbation. Of course, that's ruled out because the man is climaxing in a way that renders the act unnatural and unethical, disordered. But if there be, in the context of foreplay, this effort to please her and then complete the act, and everything is completed outrightly, it's all done in its right order, then I don't see really any trouble with that. This is a disputed question. There'll be different positions on it. Just giving you my personal opinion, given what we said last week on fellatio, within the context of foreplay. And you'll remember, for those that were here, if you weren't here, you can watch the videos from the cloud and catch up on that stuff. So that's a sort of another more detailed sort of response. Also questions that come up, more explicit questions. And once again, I apologise that we're sort of in some of this more sort of indelicate talk, but I think it's worth, in a safe environment like that we're in, we would never preach on this stuff at Mass. We would be always very careful the context of where and how we say these things, but in a class like this is what this is for, to give light and to give clarity. People often ask, are there certain positions that the Church rules out? And I think the answer is no. But I would once again lay down a similar principle that I laid down last week, in that, the kind of playfulness in foreplay is all legitimate as long as it's really attentive to the person. As soon as there's a sense of an objectification going on and a person is being reduced to some kind of object, then we know we're passing over into a disorder. So there's going to be some playfulness in foreplay. And in the same way, I would say ordinarily couples really should face one another. The face, the human face, the figura, as Aristotle calls it, communicates so much of who we are. We don't, sorry for the kind of the crude way of saying this, but we don't normally say hello to a person's behind. We don't say hello to their back. We don't say hello to their foot. We always say hello to the face, because there's something incredibly human in the face, and the eyes obviously are the doorway to the soul. The face communicates so much quality in terms of personal presence, attentiveness, openness, smile, etc., etc. So that gives us light on, a couple coming together to make love. Yeah, it's going to be most qualitative when they're facing one another, whether it's what we call the, traditional missionary position, or whether the woman is on top. All of that seems perfectly legitimate. The reason I say this is because I've had people, even in the marriage course, bring up the question, they were told when they were younger, or they were told in some particular course, that the only legitimate position for a Christian couple is the missionary position. Everyone knows what I mean by the missionary position, where the man is on top of the woman. And I don't believe that's right. I think as long as both are attentive to one another, facing one another, there's going to be different ways in which the man's body will penetrate the woman's body in a personal way where they're facing one another. Now, does that rule out any other position where they may not be facing one another? Not necessarily. I think there are moments when a woman is pregnant where it might be painful if there's another position used, so there might be for a temporary moment within the context of their love making where something is done, from behind. When I say behind, I'm not talking about anything to do with going to the toilet. I'm talking about the man entering the woman from behind. As long as it's temporary, I think the principle would be this: animals mate like that, and if that was the only way that we got together, we're basically imitating the animal kingdom. And human lovemaking is essentially human. It's spiritual and deep. It's personal. So therefore, we want to avoid situations where it's basically just copulation like animals. But that doesn't entirely rule it out, because there might be situations where there's a moment within their lovemaking where they go through this position and then they return to facing one another. So once again, I'm sorry for the sort of the indelicateness of all of that, but I think it's just good to have the principles in our minds right and not fall into sometimes some simplistic reductionist positions which are not attentive to all of the things in play. So I hope that's clear. I don't think there's any position except what I mentioned last week that is ruled out. And the one position I think is ruled out last week is anything to do with the area where we go to the toilet, right? I don't think that has anything to do with lovemaking, so I don't think that has any place in proper human intimacy within marriage and any Christian intimacy within marriage. But all the other ways, I think, can be worked together in a healthy way, as long as it's personal and deepening the love, always following the natural laws, and being, present to the other one in a personal way. The final thing I wanted to say about this is, remember last week we drew the analogy from Pope Benedict and then John Paul II, rather than using philia as the analogy of divine love, of friendship, which is an image of love, but it can be used as an analogy to speak of the fire of divine love. Benedict XVI, in his encyclical God is Love, used eros as the analogy, the fire, the volcano of God's love, and you kind of see a tiny reflection in a created way on earth, in passionate love, a tiny created reflection of something that's uncreated in God at a divine level. He is an inferno of divine love, and when you see the ecstasy and the kind of the volcanic arousal that goes on in human lovemaking at the bodily level, you get a little bit of a reflection of it. A tiny, tiny, tiny dim reflection. Infinite difference, tiny thread of similitude, and that's how we work the analogy in theology, because we don't know this love really directly, but we can only speak about it from our human experience. Normally we use friendship to say something of it. Benedict XVI used eros to say something of it. Now, I do all of that build up once again to make a careful distinction. Christopher West got into trouble and he got criticized by other theologians when he was talking about this. He gave the impression that love making in marriage is really the height of the expression of love, like the passionate love making. And there he's made a little bit of a mistake. There's 5 handouts, guys. He's made a little bit of a mistake that, remember, the spiritual love is the most important love in marriage. The friendship, the spiritual friendship, the philia, is the strongest love. It's the spiritual connection. The passionate love is eros, it's where the eroticism is. And then there's the instinctive love, where the drive for life is. But when husband and wife are loving one another spiritually, that's the strongest reflection of God, really. Because it's spiritual, it's intimately intelligent and intimately volitional. So you might find the best reflection, because remember, marriage is an icon of Christ's love for the church and the love in the Trinity. So if we're going to speak of marriage being an icon, where it will be an icon is where the spiritual love is the strongest, not necessarily the passionate love. Now, it doesn't rule out the passionate love. When husband and wife make love, and we're going to talk about it tonight, it's supernatural love, it's spiritual love, it's passionate love, it's instinctive love, all those 4 loves, definitely it's an icon. But we cannot, and where Christopher West made the mistake was he started speaking about it like the height and really the fullness of the expression where it's an icon of the divine love is in the marriage bedroom. And it may not be. The moment that, let's say, a wife does something incredibly sacrificial for her husband, or vice versa, a husband for his wife, at a spiritual level, and it may not be sexual, it's just affectionate love, that's probably going to be far more an icon of the divine love than necessarily the fire of passionate love. So it's not an either or, it's a both and all 3, but I would say the spiritual love is going to be much more, because it has far more the spiritual qualities of a divine love, but it doesn't rule out the passionate love also being an icon. And when we say icon, it's important too that we don't make of love making in marriage an idol. And sometimes spouses can do that accidentally and sometimes more explicitly. The culture does that today. You know, the height of love that Hollywood talks about is always erotic love. They hardly ever make movies about incredible sacrificial love where a wife, you know, serves her husband because he's been made a paraplegic and she spends 20 years looking after him. You know, there's not many movies made about that, but there's lots of movies made about erotic, passionate love, you know, Romeo and Juliet, all of that kind of thing, right? And there's a danger that we make of that a kind of an idol, and the thing that we're pursuing most of all, even in a Christian sense. And there we have to just still remember that the friendship between spouses spiritually, the passionate love, sensitive, the instinctive love at the vegetative level, all of this is not to be worshipped. But God alone is to be worshipped and everything under him in its right order. And remember way back in one of the earlier classes, I told you about when I was in France, my superior in the religious community used to give direction to married couples. And a lot of young married couples had come to her. She was a religious nun. And she said they were disappointed with marriage because they were expecting marriage to give them ultimate fulfillment. And they were disappointed. They were expecting, here, finally I marry my beloved and my best friend. And then I realized, they have their imperfections, their idiosyncrasies, their personal differences, and they have their good days and their bad days. And sometimes they have their sins. And boy, I can get hurt because I'm opened up and vulnerable, and when I'm not receiving the love that I'm giving, and vice versa, you know, there can be wounds. And thereby often we wound the ones that we're closest to the most because we're so much more open. And there they were saying, well, I was expecting just bliss, you know, eternal happiness in marriage, and then I realized, far out, this is hard. And so she was sort of pointing out, and rightly so, and this is what John Paul II talks about, and Christopher West, we have to make sure that we understand marriage is a temporary solution to a communion of persons, and the desire for an infinite love, an unfading love, and an undimmed truth, and it's only temporary. And so it will fulfill us to a certain point, but it will not fulfill us ultimately. Only God can fill us ultimately. So only God is to be adored in that way, and marriage is an icon. It's just a reflection, and it's an important phase on the way there. But when I say phase, we don't just say my spouse is a means. My spouse is still an end, approximate end. I choose my spouse for the sake of my spouse, I love the other one for the sake of the other one. But even if I truly believe they're a personal end that I've chosen in love, in my vows, made formal, been truly married, sacramentally so, still this person is only a limited end. My spouse is only a limited end. They're finite. They're created. God is my ultimate end, uncreated, and He's the only one that can truly fulfill me. So therefore I should not weigh and put a noose around the neck of my spouse, expecting them to provide ultimate fulfillment for me, both at the spiritual level, welcome Sheldon, and also at the sensitive level. And to know that this is all good, it's all given by God, it has its right order, it's to be lived well. It will provide deep fulfillment and happiness, but not the ultimate fulfillment and happiness. Very important that we don't make marriage an ultimate thing, and we don't make sex within marriage the ultimate thing. It's only part of the happinesses and gifts of God in this life, and they're only temporary. There'll be no sex in heaven. There'll be no intimacy of that kind in heaven. We don't need it anymore because God is the fullness of light and love for us, totally fulfilled. And further, the ecstasy in heaven will be infinitely beyond whatever we live on earth. So we won't be looking back and thinking, can I go back? There'll be none of that. It'll just be bliss upon bliss upon bliss. So there, that's important. Now, coming on to the redemptive level, we've spoken a lot about the natural friendship, spiritual friendship, all the levels. And we've spoken about how the loves work. 3 loves: instinctive love, storge, sensitive love, eros, passionate love, spiritual love, philia. And we all know that when we marry in Christ, we're in a sacramental marriage. That's also where agape comes in. So there's 4 loves that can be operative in marriage. Incredible gift. It's the only place where it is. Like the priest, myself, I'm trying to live of, a spiritual love for people, but hopefully elevated in charity. But I don't express the instinctive love for life at the level of procreation, and I don't express any eros and passionate love in terms of sensitive affection. So that's all held by virtue for a far higher end, right? Whereas in marriage, all 4 loves are being lived of and entered into in various moments in various ways. And we all know well that there's these 2 great goods of marriage and their ends as well. So they're goods, attributes, and ends. There's the unitive and the procreative. The bonding, to use the colloquial phrase, and babies. God having designed it this way. But the good news about Christian marriage, that's natural marriage. And Christian marriage has another level, and it's the redemptive level. St. Augustine, he spoke about these 2 goods in marriage. He's really the first one to begin to shed clear light on it. It was always sort of held, of course, but he begins to break it down with clarity. He adds these 2, and this one, he doesn't call it the redemptive, he calls it the remedy for concupiscence. And sometimes this has been mistranslated as alleviation. And why that's dangerous is that it leads to this kind of thinking. Marriage is for me to be with my spouse, support one another, the mutual support of spouses, unitive, and to have babies, procreative. And it's an alleviation for my disordered desires. And thereby a person can end up thinking, this is where I get to outlet my lusts. This is where I get an outlet for my disorders. I get into marriage and it's got these things, but also I get to go for it in terms of concupiscence, which is the disorder that comes about from original sin. But it doesn't mean, the original Latin translation does not mean alleviation. It means remedy. It means healing. Healing of concupiscence. And this is the redemptive element. That when spouses enter a Christian marriage, sacramentally married in Christ, there's obviously charity coming into them, into their soul. Or the grace, I should say. Let's break it down a bit more clearly. Everyone remembers these levels that we've laid out many times. Different finalities at each level. There's a finality of life for the body and the life of the species. And here, to go back one step, this is obviously storge, which is the instinctive love for life. This is eros, which is where we get the word erotic from. And this is philia, which is spiritual friendship. And this is agape, divine love. As we said in previous weeks, each lower love is to be assumed upwards and purified by a higher love. And in a natural marriage, as we've spoken about many times, there's to be this assimilation and assumption, this integration of what is lower into what is higher for it to be ethical. And the virtues create the stability by which we bring order to the passions. And the good news from a Christian perspective is that God also gives an incredible assistance at a divine level. The grace, the redemptive grace comes in, and we're talking about here, this is sacramental marriage. The divine grace comes into my soul to empower it. It uplifts my intelligence and faith, uplifts my will and hope and charity, and assists me in this movement of integration. So that I can give myself spiritually, but also spiritually uplifted in grace. And this is very beautiful because this is going on in all of married life, insofar as husband and wife are trying to lay down their lives for one another. There the grace is helping them do that and purifying them, healing them and redeeming them. But also in the marriage bedroom, in the marriage bed. So when they come to make love, they're open to life. They express it passionately, eros. They're intimate in terms of their friendship, personal, philia. And the grace is there helping this healing and reintegration occur. So, and not only that, there's a sanctification. Becoming holy insofar as they allow the grace to assist. And that's why St. Augustine, I should say, says it's a remedy. There's a disorder naturally where the passions are trying to do their own thing, the body warring against the spirit, and we need the virtues. The virtues are the natural remedy to get stability so I can love freely and ethically, and then the grace comes supernaturally to help me be healed of the disorder. And there, the more I allow the grace to purify me, the more holy I become, even in the act of making love. So when husband and wife make love, and it's out of love, it's not lust, they're open to life, they really enjoy it well together, and the grace is assisting them in the gift of themselves to one another. Their bed is like an altar on which they offer their bodies as a living sacrifice. And that's very beautiful. So it's right down. It's not just the moments of, when they're looking out for one another, but right down to the nitty-gritty of making love in the bedroom. It can be a holy act that's pleasing to God. And they're being made holy in that act. So it's not just that. So we're not making an idol of the bedroom and thinking that this is the moment of the greatest expression of marital love. It's not that. It's just this key part of marriage is not excluded from holiness. When they make love, it's where the grace can be operating if they're open. And there it's eminently pleasing to God. And it's a place of holiness drawing them on. And there, yes, this is the perspective we should have for sacramental marriage. We'll come on later in the classes that we do next year when we look at marriage in the overall picture of the covenant. When we do a covenantal theology, I'll speak more about what the grace is doing in terms of a new finality within marriage. We'll talk about that later. But at the moment, the key point is that, because we're talking about the how of these intimate moments, never forget in a sacramental marriage, in this bodily coming together, the one flesh union, the grace can be very operative and healing. And you find, I think, not always, but this can be a common experience, when couples have had a previous life, let's say before they got together, this one here, the man has had other relationships and sometimes sinful, the woman has had other relationships, sometimes sinful, and they're trying to do it well, and they come together in a chaste way, they prepare for marriage well, they get married. Often the way they come to make love in marriage is very healing for them, because all they've known previously was sinful, lustful indulgence, and now they're really living it in a holy, loving way. It can be very integrating. They refine what love is and what sexual love is in the right way. Now, it's not always the case. I know women, and I remember a married woman talking to me years ago, so you'll never know who she is. Just being careful about my words. She was struggling because of her previous experiences. She was really struggling with how lovemaking in marriage could be this kind of thing, right? Because she'd been wounded and it was affecting her. There was sort of trauma coming back at her. But that's not always the case. There can be other more lesser situations where when they come to really, really love one another and be supportive of one another, and they really are received in love and they give love, and they know they're in this for the rest of their lives. It's secure. There's an incredible security that comes about with sacramental marriage. That I know you're here for me and I'm here for you, and we're not getting out of this. We're not running away. We're here persevering until the very end. There's an incredible security in that versus the cohabitation that goes on in our world, where people don't know how long this will last and they just hope it'll be a few years and maybe a bit more. But sacramental marriage and a true marriage gives an incredible security, and in that security of the gift of themselves to one another, been made publicly, then they come together to really give themselves in the body. There's a kind of an incredible consoling healing that can occur for some, not all, and others will be fine. They just come in because they're not carrying lots of wounds, and there it's very beautiful when it's lived well. John Paul II speaks of all of this in a slightly different way. And it's in the notes, and I just want to link it up so that you can make sense of it. For John Paul II, the way that I've been speaking and breaking all this down, and then also talking about what the gospel brings, and here we can call this sort of natural philosophy, and we'll call this sort of natural ethics, and here there's gospel ethics. Right. John Paul II kind of calls this the ethic. The ethic is what gives light to how this must be lived. And there's two levels of this light. There's a gospel ethic, and then we know when we break it down, we can see sort of the right order, levels of things, how things should operate. That gives us our natural ethics, natural law, in other words. And then he talks about the context in which this is all lived. And he's sort of saying the ethics must set the tone of the ethos. Ethos, sort of the environment of all of this. What is the attitude going in? This ethos must be influenced by these ethics to be in right order, and this will help the erotic be lived ethically. And the erotic is clearly in the realm of eros. And he's saying that this has to happen. Many Christian couples and marriages and married spouses, do not allow this proper integration to occur in such a way that they close the door of their marital bedroom on God. They go to church, say, I believe, I'll be good to others outside here, but in the bedroom it's all some other ethic that's running. And he's saying, very important, that the gospel ethics and the natural law ethics determine very much the ethos so that the erotic, all the sensitive love, is lived properly. Now we've gone a bit further. We've broken it down to see how this is to happen. All the integration from the lower to the higher, then the grace assisting. We've kind of been more technical about it. But that's essentially what he's meaning when he uses these terms in the theology of the body. Different terminology, basically saying the same thing. And we've spent a lot of time on it, so hopefully it's kind of come through and coming through loud and clear. And I hope we kind of have grasped the work. So the remedy is twofold. The natural remedy to assist me to live this gift of myself is virtue. The how at the natural level is virtue. The how at the supernatural level is grace. And both work together to assist me to be able to make a gift of myself integrated, whole, generous, selfless, and holy in marriage. And we need both. We can't do one or the other. For the non-Christians, they've only really got access to the virtues, if they get access to that. Most people don't even know anything about that, right? Hopefully there's some sort of basic beginnings of virtue. For some Christians, they never really get sort of traction on getting the virtues running, but they know that they need grace. And there they'll be a little bit unstable. There's no virtue in there. The grace will be assisting, but it'll be a bit what we call unstable and incontinent. One day good, loving well, another day not so good and not loving so well. Up and down. Many marriages are like that. Two people come together with genuine love, goodwill, but the virtues are not there. They know they must go to Mass and rely on God, but there will be certain levels of instability. When I say instability, not just little minor points where we accidentally have a little moment. That happens to everybody. Padre Pio, when he was suffering, sometimes could sort of bark at people and he'd go and apologise immediately. Those little faults, God can actually leave those little faults in us to keep us humble. What I'm talking about is big movements in terms of emotional incontinence, where people can fly off the handle and lose their rag and all of that sort of up and down. And that can make being married to someone like that quite difficult when there's big shifts. So we need the natural virtues and we need the supernatural grace assisting. Which is a good news. God comes and He gives. When you get married, there is a sacramental grace for those who enter a marriage at a Christian level. There is a grace. On the day, sacramentally, and then every day going forward, there is a sacramental grace accorded. Beautiful. It's a help. So, God is merciful and good in that regard. Any thoughts or questions or comments? Yes, please.
Sorry, Father.
Yep.
There's a conflict in my head, and
Yep.
I want to go back
Yep.
to when you mentioned different positions during the sexual act,
Yeah.
especially when you gave the example of the pregnant woman.
Yeah.
I thought that the sexual act is procreation need. So is there a disorder in this situation?
No, as long as there's openness. Even if the body is not capable of making another baby, the woman's body, as long as it is both open. So that both goods are open and capable, but at that moment there's far less likelihood, almost impossible, that the woman's body conceive another child. So they're just living the unitive good, but they're open to the procreative good. It's similar when a woman goes through menopause, because if it's true what you're saying, or let's say what you're postulating, then once a woman has gone through menopause, she wouldn't be allowed to make love anymore. She'd have to stop because procreation is no longer possible. But no, and in fact we're allowed to marry people who have gone beyond the childbearing years as long as they're able to consummate at least once, and then hopefully they'll consummate a bit more. But the efficiency is gone in her body, but God could still provide a miracle like He does in the Scriptures. A barren woman who's made possible. So no, that doesn't rule it out. And the reason that it might be done in that position is just because of the pain or the awkwardness or something like that. But I would still just repeat what I was saying. I think that would be a temporary moment within the overall act, that they start face to face and they finish face to face. Maybe that's the best way to say it. So it's always personal. But does that answer your question? Yeah, so yeah, we'll come on to that later when we look more at the pro-life stuff. Yeah, I will deal with that, because not every sexual act produces a baby. So does that mean that somehow it's missing something? Not every sperm gets to find the egg, and when it does, it doesn't always work, and then sometimes there's natural inviability and spontaneous loss of children. What's it called? Miscarriage. No, what qualifies the act is the spiritual love in it, not the efficiency of storge. So, to break it down, what makes the act properly human and qualifies it, gives it its true value, is this level. But these must be involved. It must be done in a normal, natural way, so it involves the pleasure, and this must be open, even if there's something going wrong at that level. So most marital acts don't result in a child. So does that mean that somehow it's unethical? They're open to every level, but let's say this finality is not achieved. Little baby being made only happens, let's say, I don't know what the stats are, you might tell me what the stats are of marital acts. Let's say only 1 in 10 of marital acts results in a child. Does that mean the other 9 are unethical because this finality was not achieved? No, that's just the natural rhythms, and further wounding by original sin, because things are not as efficient as they used to be. Just as long as we're open at this level, what qualifies the act is the love in truth here. The spiritual love. That's what makes it valuable. And differentiates us from the animals. We're not in animal mating, we're in human love making.
Can I ask a question, Hannah?
Yes.
I don't know if you have a section on celibacy, but I thought to
We will.
see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I'm getting too ahead, then
Yeah.
let me know.
Okay.
Which is like, what is the benefit of celibacy within the marriage, and whether I've heard of Josephite marriages as well.
Yep.
If this is going to be covered later, then
We will. We'll go through all of that.
Okay,
No problem.
okay.
But the celibate, for the celibate like myself, or a nun or a brother, you're there foregoing certain things. It's in one of these. I do quickly deal with it at the very end. In that text, it says, including some considerations for a vowed religious. It'll give kind of one paragraph explanation, but we'll go through more of it. There's a sacrifice. There's a denial of a certain level being achieved in order that I live more strongly at a higher level in a celibate. Now, in a marriage where there's going to be some Josephite mechanism, normally that has to be well discerned. That has to be discerned properly with a spiritual director to make sure that there's not any selfishness going on or some other rejection of sexuality within the marriage, or even the devil tempting them to. Because what can happen, and I'll give you an example. In France, when I was in religious life, the community I was in was founded by a deacon, well, actually a Protestant pastor who converted and became Catholic. He was married. His name was Gérard Croissant, and as his name in religion, they called him Ephraim, and he was the founder of the Beatitudes community, right? Now, he married Jo Croissant, or Jo at that time, and they were married, and then he became a deacon in the church, a married deacon, and could preach extraordinarily well, an incredible teacher. Well, he was travelling so much, and she was travelling so much, that over time they drifted apart, and they were no longer really ever spending much time. They were only probably together 20 days a year, which is not enough, right? And that was and everyone was saying, this is because they're so holy, they're so spiritual. They're living a Josephite marriage. They've chosen to forego the ordinary things because they're living of a higher spiritual vocation. It all came out badly in the end that, their marriage had fallen apart and they were keeping up the appearances of it because it would be a scandal to the community that the founders who were married were no longer really in a good marriage and it had all broken apart. And then, and this is why I'm saying it, he got into trouble because he wasn't being with his wife and needing the affection, also the contact, I suppose, intimate contact. He ended up sleeping with nuns in the community and then was ejected and the Vatican defrocked him and the Vatican threw him out and all of that, right? So it all went bad and there were a lot of wounded people. But when it's not discerned properly, if people think they're being all pious and thinking we've got to a point in our marriage where we decide no longer to be together in that way, we'll just live spiritually. Well, if the man isn't virtuous and's got himself sorted out, or the woman, because it can be both, they might go looking for sexual intimacy elsewhere, which is what he did. So what we're talking about is sometimes couples in the history of the church, when they get a bit older, they've had their kids have grown up, they're no longer dependent, they're living spiritual lives, they might agree together, okay, we're just going to be spiritual, we're going to pray together, we're no longer going to make love. And that normally happens naturally by the time you hit, 60? I don't know what the depends on each couple, right? But a couple might choose it, let's say, when they're 50. They're very prayerful. They decide, well, we don't really feel the need. We're very affectionate with one another. We express our love and our friendship, and we mutually support one another. But we've decided to just be spiritual. And what does St. Paul say in Corinthians? Defer to one another out of reverence for Christ. That's what he's saying. The temporary abstinence. We're going to come on to that tonight. Now, That's fine if it's discerned well and it's been approved of by the church, by good spiritual direction. That might be the Holy Spirit, but it may not be. And there they have to be careful if they're going to enter into a kind of more spiritual arrangement. Ordinarily, marriage is for unity and affection of that kind, lovemaking and openness to children. And that's, it would be wrong if you marry someone, you make love to them a few times and they say, right, that's it, I've had enough. You'd be thinking, well, I've been defrauded here. This is not right? And I know of situations where this has kind of happened, where people have, and then you've got grounds for annulment. But so we'll talk about that a lot more when we get to it. And tonight, when we come to the more pro-life stuff, we'll talk about what the church's teaching is when it comes to the management of the rhythm of the woman's body with respect to procreation, how the church lays out several levels of ethical practice by which a couple might plan their family, and we'll look at that coming. But that's sort of towards the end tonight, the last sort of part. Before we get there, I want to look at this homosexuality stuff. But before we go there, are there any other comments or questions?
Like in some churches, like in St. Michael's, there is what looks like, I don't know, probably like a canopy. Is that the reference to like the bed altar? Is that meant to be the same?
Yeah, some people have because you do find a canopy over a bed in the traditional sense. Yes, I think there is some connection there, a bridal chamber. Yep, and the Song of Songs talks about the enclosed garden, which is a little bit of a reference to the womb of the woman and the man entering in, and only when she's given him permission and all of that. There's a lot of that imagery that goes on in the Song of Songs. Christopher West writes about this in the Theology of the Body. John Paul II actually even talks about it. So yes, liturgically you've found those same ideas being expressed. And so, yeah, the canopy, the baldachin, or sometimes it's called the ciborium, because it's a lid over the top. Yeah, it's a sign of the descent of the Holy Spirit, the Shekinah. We've got a wedding here tomorrow, and we'll use the care cloth, which will be suspended over the couple when the nuptial blessing is prayed. And that's a similar idea, that there's a blessing descending. So there, yes, the altar, there's a very good way of thinking of Mass in a holy, healthy way. It's where there is a nuptial renewal of the consummating act of Christ dying on the cross and giving life to his church. He comes again as a faithful bridegroom and there offers his life on the altar, which is also, this place of intimate union with his bride, and it's covered by this canopy, and often there are curtains in the east and the west. There were curtains. Remember the liturgy course we did? The curtains that would be drawn across at the moment of the sacrifice. You get that a lot in the east. It's all that sense of a bridal chamber, that we are closing the intimate moment where Christ comes to give himself in his body for his bride and to make her fruitful and give children to her, etc., as we know. So yeah, absolutely. It's all there. And I think it's a very, very right way of understanding it. It's a dialogue of love between the bridegroom and the bride. That's what the liturgy is deep down. It's sacrificial inside that. And it's a meal flowing out of the sacrifice. And there, I think, that's why in the West we were wrong to get rid of the altar rails, because that is the table of the Lord where you receive. The altar is where the sacrifice is offered. We've made a mess of things there. But no, it's right. It's right. And when we do the covenantal theology part next year, we'll bring this all together, that husband and wife must come back again and again at that very mystery of the Mass, which is bridal and spousal, to be fed on the one flesh of Christ, so that they can live their one flesh more fully and deeply. And you've heard me say it before, I often say it in wedding homilies, but when you have a couple being sacramentally married, when they receive communion, it's the first meal they receive together, and they're receiving the Lord. And He's giving them a one flesh union with Him in order that they can go on to be in their one flesh union themselves. So there's lovely, beautiful connections in all of this. Rightly understood, we're not sexualizing the Eucharist, we're not sexualizing God, we all know that. But we're seeing that when it's all about love, of course there will be these imageries which are very helpful to connect it all. And that's what the whole mystery of salvation is all about. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that, or questions, comments?
Father,
Yeah.
you know, you talk about the concept of the Catholic marriage.
Mm-hmm.
So apart, other, you know, outside the Catholic Church, the understanding obviously is not. They don't have that level of comprehension, and even among the Protestant Christian, some of them they're not even open to life. So where do they stand? Where you know, in terms of
It depends.
of their salvation? Surely they're so flawed, isn't it? They don't have the understanding. They're not taught.
Yeah, and this
And
is
it's so
this
poor
is
in that sense because
yep, and it varies, Paul. Like, we can't say there's one particular way that they look at it, because it'll vary. Some Protestants, the evangelicals, let's say, just taking a stab, will read Ephesians 5, where Paul talks about that marriage is an icon of Christ's love for the church, and they'll know they're given grace in their individual lives. So they may not believe that marriage is a sacrament, and they may not believe in sacramental grace, but they know that they're receiving grace in their personal lives, and they'll just believe that personal grace will help them live their marriage, which is given by God, and that the more they do that, it'll be an icon of Christ in the church. So they'll have at least that enough truth there. But there'll be others, yes, who now we can't judge the guilt of anybody because we don't know how much they know. Ignorance does, in a way, absolve from guilt when people don't realise and they've been taught wrongly, and it's no fault of their own. So we don't know. What we try to do is give more truth to our own people, and when we dialogue with such people, whether formally or informally with friends, we should try to help people, especially Protestants, know that marriage must be open to life, and it's a component, it's a constitutive component. But there'll be varying positions. Some will think of marriage only as an arrangement between two people, and that's where the danger is, and we're coming onto it. This is what leads to homosexuality, the allowance of it, I should say. The disorder's there from original sin, from the dawn of time. But the allowance of thinking that this is okay has entered the equation as soon as contraception was accepted in a widespread way in Christianity. And that began really in the 20th century with the Anglicans in the Lambeth Conference in the 1930s, for those who know the history. Before that, most Protestants were in agreement with us that contraception was wrong. And with the Anglicans, the Church of England, with the famous Lambeth Conference, it's like their big Vatican assembly, all their bishops and whatnot, they opened the door. They opened it in a very subtle way to the allowance in limited cases. And of course, with all these things, they widen it. So basically, they've allowed contraception. And then many other Christian groups begin to follow. And then along comes chemical contraception, the pill, in the 1960s. There's a big fight inside the Catholic Church. We'll come on to that. And then all the Protestants have given way on it. And then they've given way on remarriage. So you're right, they're very poor. But many Catholics are poor in their understanding and their practice as well. And not only that, like many Catholics who don't know any better, many Protestants don't know any better. I'm not saying they're all guilt-free, but we don't need to necessarily try to work out this. Let's just work to try to get the truth more loved and known in this sense. But your question and what we're talking about is a segue into looking at how homosexuality has risen. Now, there's different ways of looking at this. What I was just talking about there is politically, culturally, the separation of the unitive and the procreative good and end in marriage has led to the rise of homosexual acceptance and practice among Christians and in the wider community. Paul VI prophesied this in Humanae Vitae, if you remember. He said, if we allow this, meaning chemical contraception, these will be the cascading effects. And he prophesied all the problems. Everything we're seeing now, pornography, adultery, abortion, contraception, homosexuality, everything, adultery, he said this will all increase if you allow contraception, where a man can kind of use a woman for sex or for pleasure and she can kind of use him. This will open the floodgates. Now that's culturally and politically. What I want to have a look at tonight in terms of homosexuality and its origins is a bit more the internal mechanisms of how it comes about in a person. Now, no doubt, the disorder from original sin is the ground on which these things grow. So there's a wound in us where all of us struggle to control our passions, right? We've gone through this. Concupiscence, the inclination to evil. Original sin has meant that I don't have the gift of integrity. Remember we went through the gift of integrity in the Garden of Eden, and when we sin, we lose the gift of integrity. The gift of integrity gave power to my intelligence and my will to properly assimilate and assume my lower drives and passions and put them at the service of the good and the true that I know and love and under God. Now, when I lose the gift of integrity, there's a war within me. All of us, every single one of us is born with the passions sort of going and wanting to do their own thing, and me hopefully growing in my spirit, and there the virtues are needed to once again get this integration and then the grace. So when we speak of disorder, we've all got disorders in us from birth, by nature, by wounded nature. So there clearly the homosexual disorder is this one species of this disorder, but very particular, right? It's problematic in a stronger way because at least if I'm heterosexually orientated, my disorder is just in the way that I'm trying to live heterosexuality, and I can still get married and hopefully develop the virtues before marriage and then rely on the grace within marriage and live this beautiful union, being fruitful. The one who has the issue of homosexuality is attracted to the same sex, and so therefore it's got another level of disorder in it, and a critical one at that. The end is all wrong. So it's not just my difficulty of the how, I'm going to live my heterosexuality. I've got my difficulty of the how, and I'm actually pointing in the wrong direction. And that's the orientation, as we call it, the wrong orientation. Now, there clearly, at one level, this is arising from original sin. It's been there from the very beginning. But, the science has shown that there's no gene of homosexuality. There's no real material cause, okay? Everyone's looked. No one has ever been able to find a gene that they think produces this orientation. And almost all the literature, if it's good literature, I'm not talking about far left literature, but objective, dispassionate, impartial literature, all shows that the issue of homosexuality and gender, it's really gender identity issues, all comes from nurture rather than from broken nature. Okay. But we do agree there's an element of broken nature under it all, because we're all wounded by original sin. There's all a bit of a disorder. So no surprise that there are going to be these disorders that are there somewhere, somehow. So the question is, is there somehow, and so that disorder in the nature, is there a material component? Now, we don't know. That's the truth of it. We don't know if there's a material component, but no one's ever found that material component. And when they've done the studies, almost all the studies show that 99% of homosexuality is produced by environmental conditioning, right? So environmental conditioning means how I'm brought up. So nature means it's built in somehow. Environmental conditioning, nurture, is how I grow. And so, this character here, I've given you the handouts for, this is a Catholic clinical psychologist, Dr. Joseph Nicolosi. I've put videos from him in the cloud that I've shared with you, the cloud link. He has a very good thesis on both male homosexuality and lesbianism, of how they come about. And I think this makes eminent sense. Okay, this is a thesis. This is not doctrine of the church. It's his personal breakdown from many, many years, over 25 years of clinical experience working with homosexuals, mainly males, helping them work out what are the causes. So let's just read through a little bit of this. Dr. Joseph Nicolosi founded and directed the Thomas Aquinas Psychological Clinic in, I think it's in Chino, California. The clinic was named in honor of St. Thomas Aquinas and served as a primary base for his clinical practice and reparative therapy work from the 1980s until his death in 2017. After his passing, the clinic was continued for a time by his son, Joseph Nicolosi Jr., under the slightly rebranded name Nicolosi Clinic or the Breakthrough Clinic, but the original and best known name during Dr. Nicolosi Sr.'s lifetime was the Thomas Aquinas Psychological Clinic. Now, that clinic's been closed. You know why? Because they made it illegal to do reparative therapy. So the whole, he worked for 20 odd years or more helping men recover from this, and then they changed the laws and they outlawed his books. He wrote 2 books on it, very good books, and Amazon banned them, right? Because of the whole idea that, what do you call it? Conversion therapy is all wrong. So, sad to say, his videos have been taken down. I managed to get his videos before they got banned from YouTube. They might be back up because, there's a little bit more openness now, but I managed to get them down. So they're on the cloud. Now, I actually personally think his thesis is very good. Without going through, I won't read through all of it because I've given you the Google AI summary and the Grok AI summary. This is essentially his thesis, that for a boy, quite early on, the boy needs to begin. It's got a very close connection to the mother, 9 months in the womb, breastfeeding, very strong bond, maternal bond. And there's a moment where the boy needs to begin to make a bond with the father and go towards the father and discover his own masculinity in relation to the father. And that has various stages, 1 to 3 and then 3 to 5 and then 5 to 10 and then onwards and upwards. And there are various stages that must go through for the boy, spending time with his dad, knowing what masculinity is in relation to his dad, beginning to be alongside his dad. And he actually makes a very natural transition from being mama's boy to being dad's boy. He still loves mum and he's still quite at peace in the orbit of mum, but he bonds and he properly finds who he is, his identity in relation to his father, and through these transitional stages. And what allows that right transition from the father's side are 2 key qualities. And this makes eminent sense. The father has to be good, and the father has to have a certain virility, meaning a certain manly strength. 2 qualities. Now, when we say manly strength, he doesn't have to be Superman, but he has to sense in his father someone that he admires, someone he looks up to, a hero that he wants to imitate. Here's Dad. Dad's strong. Dad can look after me, but I also feel Dad loves me. Dad has a warm heart towards me. Dad is going to protect me. I'm cherished in the eyes of Dad. I know that I'm his boy and he loves me. Now, if that doesn't happen, these 2 things, then there'll be something defective in the way that he's making his relationship with his father. If the father's a bit cold, a bit distant, or too weak and emasculated by the wife and made to look like an idiot, etc., then the strength is not there and the goodness. And you can sometimes have a good father who's weak or a very cold father who's strong. And there it can create these imbalances. You need both. And when we say good, most men have this by nature. They love their boy and they just want to do everything. They want to teach him to ride the bike. They want to teach him to bang the nails into the bit of wood and to build the things and teach him, hiking and boating and all of that stuff, right? It normally happens naturally. He just loves his child, and the boy feels it. The goodness of the love of the father and the certain strength, the virility of the father. But when they're not there, then the boy doesn't begin to transition from the mother towards the father, or is afraid of the father, if the father's abusive, etc., nasty, mean, he'll retract from the father and be more in the orbit of the mother. And there, he will have something of an identity issue. Now, it doesn't mean that all boys who have an identity issue around this, because there's a lot of fatherless boys out there. This is definitely going to happen when there's no father in the home, right? It doesn't mean they all turn out to be homosexual. There might be some other way forward. They might, join a sports team at work, at school, and they've got lots of mates who are heterosexual and they're virile, and they learn to develop their manhood among their friends. Or they have a sports teacher that they admire, or an older brother that becomes the father figure. There's all these other ways that can kind of a little bit get regulated. But nonetheless, if that bond is not made and it's serious, and you add in a few other things, the boy's sensitive, maybe he's a bit more artistic, temperamental things that make him a little bit more vulnerable, that he needs the love of the father in that way more than another boy who's missing it as well, then he will be missing something in his growth, and at a certain point he'll be yearning and thirsting for the relationship he didn't have with his father. And the mother can get idolized. The queen who's pure, who I can't touch, and thereby women are not to be desired in that way, a little bit an imitation of the mother, a copy and representative. So therefore I begin to gravitate looking for this connection with men, the relationship with men, and then sometimes it'll go wrong. They'll know that they're sexually attracted to the men, and they're looking for this missing relationship, and then begin to act out on it. And once they've begun to act out on it, it creates this terrible sort of habit of looking for that high, that intimate so-called high with other men, and then it goes down a terrible, terrible dark spiral. And in a culture like ours, where they're told it's all fine in school, and it's everywhere in the culture, and they're told, go, 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 do it, indulge. Yeah, there's a whole new, wider category of young men who have not had fathers, who are missing their fathers, who have these needs unmet, and the culture siphons them and shepherds them into this destruction. So, of course, the homosexual men community will grow and expand in a culture that amplifies all of this and tells them it's all fine, it's all right, when it's really, deep down, a identity issue. I don't know who I am, and I'm looking for who I am, and I need my father to tell me who I am, and I go looking for that lost relationship in a disordered sexual way. Now, one of the best ways out is not just the sports coat or the older brother, but it's to be Christian and to come to know my Father in heaven, who's truly good and truly strong, and there I can find healing. And so, this is what this guy was trying to do. He was working psychologically to repair these wounds, but also trying to put them in touch with the Lord, who is a true Father, and there find who they are, their true identity in God, heal some of their identity issues on earth, and a lot of them turned out to be recovered homosexuals and became heterosexual. Not all of them. And he made a basic breakdown. It's only basic, okay? But a third of those who identify with homosexual issues are deep-seated. From very young, early on, they knew they were attracted to the same sex, and it's probably not going to be entirely resolved. Then there was another group at the other end who it was more fleeting, more transitory, with a bit of psychological therapy, helping them find where their wounds are, helping repair those wounds by good father figures, etc. Masculine company, that's right. They would easily transition and become what they're made to be, what is heterosexual. No one is made homosexual, right? No one is born this way, as they say, right? We're all born with a body that's supposed to be heterosexual, but the wounding gets in the way and turns it off track. So the group in the middle was the harder group. He said that sometimes they could be helped and other times they couldn't because of the deep level of wounding that was in them, and they might have been abused and that kind of stuff. So sometimes, yes, male homosexuality also came about from sexual abuse. They've been abused by a male, and thereby somehow they've got all rewired badly, and they think that this is the only place where they have sexual contact, and they go in a way and replicate. And that's why you find, unfortunately, a cycle of abuse. Children that have been abused often go on to be abusers themselves because of this messing up that goes on, bad. So the good news is it can be helped. It's just really deep down emotional needs that are unmet. It produces an identity issue. We can help people by encountering the Father in heaven to resolve the deepest identity issues, and then help them maybe work through some of their issues. And it's okay, fine. There might be some who still hold these issues, and there we get along beside them and help them as Christians, if they are Christian, live a Christian life in a chaste, celibate way, accepting this cross that has happened to them and trying to live it in the right way. So that's male homosexuality, and I believe he's absolutely right in his breakdown of this stuff. And the reason I believe he's got the two qualities right, goodness and strength, is because you very much see that in God. When you get that wrong about God, if you think God is not so good, he's mean and he's strong, you end up with a tyrant. If you think he's good and he's not strong, you end up with a teddy bear in heaven. That's the progressives and the liberals, and that's the hardcore, sort of nasty Pharisaical wing of the church, whatever you want to name it, right? But you want to be in the truth that God is incredibly merciful, incredibly loving, a Father that wants the best for us, knows our sufferings and will carry us, and has the strength to carry us through all of that. And as a Father is trying to get me to go further. He's stretching me. God will stretch me and ask me sometimes to go beyond my limits because he knows my limits and he'll give me the strength to go beyond them. God is not really just a mollycoddler. He says to stay in your cotton wool, right? Sometimes he'll do that when we really need it. And we're really needing lots of healing and lots of gentle loving. There'll be other times where God says, come with me and I'm going to pull you through this difficult thing and you're going to grow in the process. And any good father does that. And that's really the difference often between the love of a mother and the love of a father in a good family anyway. The mother is very much the mother hen who just wraps everyone and loves them and wants to be a warmth. And the father is a sense that I've got to help my child grow. I've got to extend them a bit. I've got to push them a bit. I've got to, I've got to put them in a bit of a risky situation to see how they'll go. And then they rise to the challenge, hopefully. If they don't, okay, we help them start again in a good way. So you see that in God, and you need that in a human father, and you need the dynamics of a mum and a dad and a family. And sadly today there are many broken families. There's many missing fathers, and the delinquency, you know this I'm sure, in the United States, the reason that the crime rate is so high among the African American community is not racism. A tiny amount of racism, but the main reason is that there are fatherless families. 60 to 70% of African American families are fatherless. When you've got no fathers, there's no moral backbone, there's no direction, there's no purpose to life. Delinquency will be high. The crime rate and the prison rate is high. It's the same in some communities in New Zealand. So it's not rocket science. Fix your culture, look at your family life, try to be faithful, get married, have children, stick around, be a good dad, and your children might get better. You can't expect the state to fix all of that. The state doesn't have the capacity to do that for children. So, no one wants to listen to this today. And so it does apply at the level of this issue of male homosexuality. So have a read through. There's a sort of a bit of a summary. Lesbianism. Okay, before we go to the lesbianism, any questions or thoughts on that? The reason I'm wanting to give this to you is that if you know people who struggle, who have this issue, or you encounter people, it gives you some light to work with in terms of advice, in terms of just understanding their issues, loving them where they're at, guidance. It might be family members, and then you might look back. Let's say there's a family member in your own family that has this issue. It might give you the interpretive key to work out where the issue came in, etc., etc. Okay. Lesbianism's a bit different. According to Dr. Nicolosi, there's 3 types of lesbians. That you can see them on the front page of the handout. I've summarised this. I listened to the video today and summarised it quickly. And then I've got the AI summaries. It's the benefit of AI. They can just quickly summarise. I've done both Google and Grok, because sometimes Grok's a bit off. So no surprise. It's artificial. Okay, number 1. The stressed mother who is under stress and difficulty, back and forth in terms of her emotional attention towards her daughter. The mother tunes in and out and the baby can't connect, shuts down, disassociates, zones out in defense and in self-protection. So has never properly bonded with the mother. Because it's different. Of course, the girl, she's got a different dynamic. The boy has to transition from the mother to the father. The girl, being a girl, is going to be in the orbit of the woman and is going to have a different relation to the father, of course. So it's a different dynamic. So here, the girl grows up and at a certain point suddenly finds a feminine connection with another woman where the missing maternal instinctive needs are finally being met, kind of infatuation develops, and consequently the possibility of a sexual relationship. So that's one, it's an identity issue. And they might have bonded really well with their father. They might know they're well loved by their father, but there's a missing component in terms of the love of the mother because of her difficulty. Type 2, this is the more typical, stereotypical lesbian, is the more masculine kind. This is the girl who disidentified with the mother and bonded with the father. So she's essentially done what the boy should do. And why does a girl do this? Usually because the mother is passive, ineffectual, and inadequate. The mother is perceived as weak and is crushed by the father. So here you get the other dynamic, not the woman crushing the man, but the man crushing the woman. The father's charismatic, dynamic, competent. He gives the girl attention, affection, and love. Femininity is perceived as a weakness. Femininity is a weakness, especially if the father is abusive to the mother. Femininity is seen as a negative, so the girl tries to act like a boy, assuming a masculine identity. This can be reinforced in a culture where true femininity is rejected as weakness and modern-day women try to act like men. So in a culture like ours, where feminism thinks that femininity is weakness and they want to be masculine, yeah, it'll produce more lesbians in various ways. Because they don't want to be women at some level. There's a rejection happening. And there, sometimes you get type 1 bonding with type 2, and you often see that. You know, often the feminine woman with the masculine woman. I don't know if you know of Ellen DeGeneres, who's with Portia de Rossi. Portia de Rossi is the kind of the beautiful feminine one, and Ellen looks like a boy. She dresses like a boy, she combs her hair like a boy. It's incredible how that plays out, and so many of them are like that. The man, you know, there's a kind of a strange simulation of a heterosexual relationship going on. Number 3, this is where the girl has been sexually molested or hurt. This is not true lesbianism, it's more of a heterophobia, so fear. The girl or woman has suffered at the hands of men sexually and or emotionally, so she sexually regresses to lesbianism as a comfort zone. This type is the easiest to remedy through therapy because it's not a doubt about deep emotional needs unmet, nor about identity confusion, but is a phobia, an irrational fear of being hurt by men, and gravitates and sort of pushes in the other direction. And a woman can have a combination of all these. So it can all happen because it's, you know, complex. It's a very dynamic relationships with mum and dad. But I would say this, all the gender confusion is all identity issue that comes from relationship between mum and dad, lacking in some way or another. Then the culture amplifies it, and then a person, let's say, indulges, so they get kind of caught up in all of the emotional high that the sexual activity gives them. And for those who've done any research, I haven't, but when I was in France, this is way back in the 90s, I was reading a famous magazine, we all were, called Famille Chrétienne, Christian Family in France. And in the community I was in, they had their own periodical, and they would often print articles about these issues. This is in the 90s, before the gender stuff came along. And there were often testimonials from those who suffer from homosexuality who converted, become Catholic and, you know, in a way recovered, but still may be struggling. And their testimony was that the homosexual world was full of infidelity, full of multiple partner arrangements, because sex was king. It was extremely indulgent, multiple partners, infidelities. So when you hear about the monogamous homosexual partner group, it's more the minority. I'm not saying they don't exist. My dad's got neighbours, 2 men who live together for many years, and I assume that they're kind of in some kind of stable arrangement. Sure, it exists, but the stats show that a large percentage of that community are in constant moving relationships, indulgent, infidelity, because it's constantly looking for the eros high. It's an emotional wound. So you get it satisfied here, and then I go on to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Now that happens in heterosexuality as well. You get a woman who's been wounded by her dad, but she's heterosexual. She goes looking for the relationship with her dad in sexual promiscuity. I had a friend like this when I was at school. A girl I knew from the local high school, she'd been adopted. So she never had a relationship with her parents. She had identity wounds. She was extremely promiscuous. She was known as the girl who just slept around. And that's all a result of these unmet emotional needs. So it can happen in the heterosexual world. And then they get addicted to the sexual and the emotional connection. And it happens even more in the homosexual world, where they're constantly going from... Because women are looking for more emotional connection, whereas men often can be quite happy to just have a very shallow sexual expression, bang, then move on to the next, where women tend not to do that so much. They're more yearning for the emotional thing. So, the reason I bring this in here is that This is where theology of the body is so valuable. It's not just a theology of love. Now, I've heard in this diocese and around the world, because I've heard negativity towards theology of the body and trying to replace theology of the body with so-called theology of love, because the body is objective. When you do a theology of the body, you're immediately going to see the complementarity between men and women and why they fit together and how they need one another. And then immediately you see that the homosexual arrangement doesn't work under God and naturally speaking. It's an anomaly that then we don't have an answer to. So in order not to face that reality, I know there are theologians and there have been priests in this diocese that when we've tried to run theology of the body courses, they've said, no, we just want to do a theology of love, because love is love. You can kind of talk just about love between anybody. Anybody, doesn't matter how their bodies fit together or not. And that's definitely a ploy to try to move away from the objectivity of the body and the realism it implies coming down from the revelation and coming up from our natural ethics. So homosexuality, as you well know, there's no place for us to approve of the activity. There's a massive place for us to have mercy, understanding, patience for the fragility that same-sex attraction is. It's a fragility. I think it's better to speak of that way. I don't think we should really speak of it as a sickness. I think the culture is sick in the way that it promotes it, right? I definitely can say that. The ideology is sick. But the wound in a person, it makes them very fragile and wrongly orientated. And it helps us, I think, consider them as, a human being with dignity, all of that, and all God's love for them as they struggle. But we can never approve of it. We can never say, yeah, there's a way you can kind of live your Christian life and have your relationship. Certainly we can never say yes to homosexual marriage. And so that's where you've got to be careful. If you've got someone who comes to you who's struggling, never give advice that gives the impression that they'll be happy if they live a homosexual relation or get into some stable bond, those kinds of things. Always be very careful to try to be loving, patient and kind, but still be faithful to the truth of what they need for their well-being, for their flourishment, and for their salvation. We cannot lie to people in this regard. And that's why I took serious issue with the document that came out in 2023 from Pope Francis and his dicastery, giving the impression that we can bless these groups in various ways using clever language. I think that just is communicating completely the wrong message, right? So, and I gave homilies on that very strongly. I can't see how that is legitimate. I think that was a giving away to a very, very bad pastoral prudence, and there I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt that it's just a prudence, but it's possible that in behind is an idea, a kind of quasi-doctrine in the mind of the authors that somehow thinks we can find a way to legitimate and legitimize these relations. And I will never accept that. Never, even if it comes down from the highest authority in the church. He doesn't have the authority to change the natural law nor the revelation on this point. So we follow Christ, even if the Pope runs like Peter did on the night of the Passion. He ran from the crucifixion and it was only John and Mary who were faithful. Stay with John and Mary. We don't follow the Pope when he's going down bad paths. So that aside, I think we have to try to communicate as best we can the truth on this matter. Now it's hard. I've had people come to me, and I can share this story because this will never come back, and this person is long gone, and only briefly here anyway, so no one would know who this person is. But I had a woman come and see me, and she was engaged to her lesbian partner and had been raped and abused. So clear, we know the cause of her going towards women, and very, very hurt and wounded. And she wanted to be part of the parish. She drove past one night and saw us very joyfully laughing outside the church after an Immaculate Conception Mass. It was an evening Mass, and thought, I want that. I want the happiness of that implies. And came to see me out of the blue, but was well prepared. She knew the landscape. She wanted me to give her a full carte blanche, yes, to joining the parish and being in her lesbian relationship, engaged, going towards some kind of marriage. And I didn't want to deal with that first up. I just wanted to tell her that the Lord loved her. She wanted the answer. She wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of it. And I said, look, I just want to talk about Christ, who Jesus is, and put him in front of you so that you can come to know your Saviour. Even if we know, you're carrying these sufferings. But she was quite insistent, and we tried to talk about it, and then she still wanted an answer, and then she diverted off that and wanted an answer to this question before the inclusion question, and it was, where does my homosexuality come from? Where does this come from? And so we tried to have a discussion, and it was impossible to resolve the discussion without talking about original sin and the wounds that she'd been through. And she really thought, but hang on, I feel this is me. How can God be asking me not to live this way? Can I really think this is my true identity? Surely God would not be asking me to suffer and resist this love that I have for this woman. She obviously had this strong love. And so we tried to talk around it and look at all of the causes, all the stuff we've done here. Original sin, that just because people have desires, it doesn't necessarily mean we can always act upon them and follow those desires. Sometimes there are disorders. And she didn't want to hear any of that. She was good. She was very reasonable. She was very broken, so she cried a lot. And in the end, it still came back to that question, can I be part of your community? And I said, well, look, you're always welcome. You can come to Mass. You can sit in the church. You can pray always. And then she said, can I be affectionate? Can I bring my fiancé and be affectionate in the church with her? And can I hold her hand in the hall? And can I act like a couple in your parish? And in the end, I had to say no. I said, we've got children here who are doing catechism. If they see you, they'll be utterly confused. And further, by me saying yes to that, I'm giving you the impression that this is okay. I cannot, at two levels, for your own good and for the good of the community, I can't say yes to that question. But I certainly will tell you, you're always welcome as an individual. You're always loved by Christ. You can sit in the church anytime. There's no judgment, and you can pray. She always said she felt peace when she sat in our church quietly in the afternoon. And there it was very hard. In the end, she had to go. She came back a second time, and we went really around the same conversation. I was trying to tell her, look, I've got some resources. I've got some people you could talk to, even pray with you. But she was extremely wounded. So, I pray for her. But you might come across similar situations where people are so wounded, they really just want everything to be approved of. And you feel the tug in your heart, the mercy you have for this person, so wounded, so hurt. You want them to know the love of Christ, and there's a danger in wanting them to know the love of Christ that we might say yes to things that we shouldn't say yes to. And there we have to just be on guard. Now, sometimes we can go very far. We can go right up to the line, not in church, because this was a very specific situation. She wanted to come in and bring in disorder. Whereas sometimes, you got a friend at work who identifies in this way and says, let's go for a coffee. Of course, there's nothing wrong with having a coffee with someone like this. There's no danger really for most people. Sit down, befriend them, love them where they're at, listen to them. Don't give them the impression they're feeling like they're being judged, and just try to work out, Lord, how can I evangelize this person? And sometimes it might take years. So there we must have extreme, I think, patience. God has an immense amount of patience. He loves these people, of course, loves us all with all of our wounds. But I think we have to be truthful. We can never agree with untruth or, I suppose, lie at the service of trying to help someone. Lying to someone never does them any good. Now, sometimes we'll be silent and we'll wait. We're plotting in a good way. Thinking, okay, I won't mention this at this moment. I'm just going to try to build this trust here, and then I'll try to, what friend could they meet that this would help them? You're trying to map, how can I help them, stage by stage, step by step. That's intelligent, that's prudent. Sometimes we can rush in too quickly, but other times, sometimes it's worth being bold. So it's really hard to discern. Should I be bold here? Should I be more cautious? Should I be more, a little bit gentle or a little bit pushy? Sometimes it's hard to know, but I think we always must have an incredibly merciful regard upon this, given the culture, given the wounds from family life, given the fact that we know it ultimately comes back to original sin, and we want to help people. We want people to be saved. So I thought it would just look at that to understand it more acutely. Now, I'm talking there at the personal level. In the culture, you've got strong ideologies, you've got nastiness, Like the woke brigade will cancel and bully and try to destroy people when you won't agree with them. That's at the political level. And there, yeah, we've got to fight back. Absolutely. At the political level, sometimes some of our commentators, Catholic commentators, will have to be very incisive to show the crap that's going on, and that's not unmerciful. Sometimes that's a strategic way of trying to show people, the wider community, that this has got inherent contradictions in it, this wounds people, these are actually nasty people, they're not inclusive, they're not tolerant, they're not actually helping people, they're making people worse. You know, I think there's a place in the culture to sometimes quite aggressively push back on that. So, you know, I'm talking about people that are really working at the coalface politically, you know, good philosophers, good influencers online that are trying. Now it's hard though, because online, and this is where it's really difficult, personally we all know, we're normally very patient and good with anybody personally. I'm sure everyone in this room is very going to be merciful. When we're online, when we can say something genuinely right and very reasonably formulated, and someone will take it in the worst possible way. And I know that preaching, but at least here I know I've got about 300-400. I kind of know who I'm preaching to. Online, it's not just public, it's almost universal. You put something else and it goes out to how many thousands see it. And people can easily take a normal thing and get wounded by it. And I think, yeah, we've got to take that into consideration. We've got to be careful. We've got to think carefully about how we formulate things. But still, I think sometimes we have to formulate things honestly and accept that some people are not in the truth. And when the truth comes at them, they don't want to be hurt by the truth. And there they reject the truth. And Christ, remember, Christ said things. And people reacted, and it was because they were proud and they didn't want the truth, or they were hurt and they may have run away from the truth. But he still taught the truth with love, of course. So this is important. Just because a person recoils and feels wounded by the truth doesn't necessarily mean that the truth shouldn't have been said. But we've got to always be prudent, intelligent about how we say the truth, and it must be always motivated by love and with carefulness for the time. So that's hard. That's a lot of variables in our current time to weigh up when we're dealing with this. But I think God will always be on our side if we're trying to love and we're trying to be faithful to the truth and look after people. And don't be surprised if we get rejected for that. Yeah, we will get rejected. So, any other thoughts or comments on that? Yes, Aaron?
Yeah. So using myself as an example, if we look at the 3 types here, you can just like point at me and say that's the number 2, right?
Okay, right, okay.
But like more seriously, this kind of content I find like really personally helpful.
Yeah.
And it's not the kind of content I find like mainstream. And it's interesting and troubling to me to hear you say that Nicolosi's talks, like for example on YouTube, have been removed, and I'm curious, like why, in your opinion, that kind of suppression is happening when it is like useful and loving content.
Yeah, I think it's just ideological, and YouTube maybe's got a little bit better. They've let a few people back because when Elon got X, there was there's been a loosening, but not entirely. But the algorithms in those days were they were scanning through every video and every talk, and there were key words, you know this well as an engineer, that they were flagging, and if there was a combination of those words, the algorithm would throttle back the availability, and if it got to a certain point, they'd cancel the video and the channel. And that happened to Nicolosi, and the reason was because he often got quoted out of context and made to look like a crazy man, and it was unfair to him. Like he would go on a current affairs program and begin to explain his really good sort of reasonable thesis, and accidentally say something that was sort of in the context of a bigger thing, and they'd take out that one little phrase and then repeat that on the nightly news in California and make him look like a quack. And multiple times tried to make him look like he was a quack junkie, kind of wrong, shallow psychologist, and discredit him. And then further, within the profession itself, A lot of them, and he points this out in one of the videos, that when they were having they're changing the psychological designations of homosexuality and that, the people that were making the decisions were all homosexual. There was no balance. There was no sort of heterosexual psychologists and a few homosexuals, representative of the overall ratio in the community. It was always one-sided and thereby very ideological to shut down. So they managed to, in the overall discipline of psychology and psychiatry, they managed to get the upper hand for decades, from the 90s and 80s onwards, and then very strong in the 2000s, 2010s, and still to this day, that they all took away all the designations that talk about this being an issue you can overcome and work your way out of. All now it just says it's a normal thing you accept, and you will do damage to people if you speak this way, implying that there's something missing. Just you've got to normalize. And so YouTube followed that. YouTube followed what they thought was good science, but they're also ideological. YouTube's full, and Google is full of lefty people who don't want any of this being available. They don't even want an allowance of a tolerance of another opinion. You know how that's how the woke worked very strongly, less so now, but so strong. So, a mono thinking. And so poor old Nicolosi, he was kind of blacklisted. And then in the end, his clinic got shut down because they passed the laws, and he died, and his son tried to take it over and continue. And then his books, Amazon wouldn't sell his books, and the videos got taken down. Now, like when you hear him talk, he's incredibly merciful. You can tell he has a heart. He worked for 25 years with guys that were struggling. He really wants to help them. This is not crazy pray the gay away. He's not doing anything that, which is wrong, right? You can't just pray with people and it's all going to go away. Sometimes, 1% of the time there might be a miraculous healing. Thanks be to God, right? But he was working with proper clinical therapy, resolving the deep causes to help people get better. And so, but he was painted in that way, right? As if he was a crazy Christian who was just trying to fix things up in a superficial way and thereby causing more trouble and deeper wounds. So it's very troubling that we're in a time where you can't do, I think what he did was decent science. He had a whole clinic, other psychologists working with him. And he's Catholic to boot, so it helps. And the reason he called it Thomas Aquinas, he'd obviously done enough work on the anthropology to understand the human person from an Aquinas Thomistic perspective, then build the psychology in. So there, even more to our liking as a Catholic. We're gonna listen to him a bit more because he's got the faith. He works in a Christian context. He's not an atheist, so he's not deliberately shutting down the religious dimension of the human person, not shutting out Christ. He'll be helping them pray, a man that we would listen to, even though we may not agree with every, I'm not saying he's got everything perfectly right, but he's certainly someone that you would listen to as an expert and say, okay, your expert opinion is something that we'll take on board. So, thanks for sharing that, Aaron. I think it helps people, even in a certain self-knowledge, just think, okay, I don't feel as weird because now I understand where this is coming from. I get above my wounds a bit more and feel a certain freedom above them and even power over them because I can see, all this is that I've missed out on something. And I go to the Lord even and say, Lord, help me resolve this. Help me find who I am in you and under you. And that's the consoling thing. The good news as Christians is that not only do we have these kinds of psychological helps, we have a God who knows everything. And he knows me more than I know myself. And he knows what's motivated me deep down. And so it's incredibly consoling. I can go to the Lord and say, well, Lord, I give you all my history, all my difficulties, all my wounds, all my challenges. And Lord, I ask you to help me know me in you. And that's the true knowledge of myself. How do I come to know me as you see me and you know me? And that's very beautiful. It's very consoling to say, I want to see myself through your eyes, Lord. Because you know the real me, you love me, you see the good in me, you see the wounds in me, but you still love me. And you're going to help me move forward to come to know myself more in you. And that's the incredibly, I think, consoling thing of Christianity, true Christianity. We've got these wounds, we have our natural things we try to work with, we've got our virtues that we try to build, but Christ can fix it all. And even if we carry to our grave our wounds, well, it doesn't matter. As long as we're in Christ and with him. And sometimes God leaves the wounds in us deliberately so that we remain dependent, vulnerable, and humble, and aware of our need. And He does do that. Sometimes He'll fix things and He'll resolve it in marriage when we fall in love and get married. Often, like I was saying, there's so much healing that goes on. Feeling that I'm loved and received is very reassuring and upbuilding. But other times God might leave other fault lines in us to remind us, you still need me. You've got your imperfections, you've got your tendency to sin and your sins. Never forget that I am here for you and you always need me to save you. Lucy.
I had a thought on what you were saying, is that what we generally should look at is why is society against the Catholic Church? And you can generally say it's because the world belongs to the devil. The devil hates the truth. Why do they target the Catholics? Because we're the ones who hold the truth. They don't want to persecute people who are already living lies. They don't care about that. They're going to go for the people who are talking and speaking about the truth. And they don't want to have them on platforms like YouTube. They don't want to have their books published. They don't want that out there in the open because that's contrary to their goals and their desires.
And their ideology.
They want us to shut up and go away. That's what they want us to do.
Yeah, no, I agree. And they're still ideological. For those who are aware of their hatred of the church, it's normally because of ideology. Their life view, their view of the world, they feel that the Catholic Church is a great threat to their view of a free world, of whatever freedom they're conceiving of. And that's why I think you're right, the strange alliance between the left and Islam, what brings them together so much in the left, where the feminists are all silent about the mistreatment of women under Islam. The left is always silent about the totalitarian regimes in the Middle East and never says anything about them. There's a strange, bizarre alliance, and I think the glue that holds them together for the time being, because it won't always be that way, is a mutual hatred of the West and what the West has brought. Now, when they hate the West, they're not hating, here we see the wonderful Christendom that brought salvation. No, it's not that. I think they have been so indoctrinated. They think the Catholic Church is the source of corruption, of nasty Pharisaical judgment, of sexual abuse of children, of slavery, of racism, of oppression through colonialism. You list out all of the grievances, right? The church is behind the oppression of minorities everywhere, whether racial minorities or sexual minorities or any other. She's the cause. And we've finally been liberated by the Enlightenment, and we're never going to allow this to come back. I really think that's what they think. So they've been so poisoned against the goodness of the Catholic Church, thinking it's the cause of all the problems in the West. And thereby they'll ally themselves together as somehow, Islam is one of these victims. The Crusades was the Christians victimizing Muslims. And thereby they're one of the minorities that will allow to have their place and will kind of turn a blind eye. They kind of know there are problems, but they're hoping against hope. Our liberalism and our Enlightenment principles will slowly fix them up in time. So don't worry, it'll be okay. But we certainly don't want the Catholic Church being anywhere around. It is so insane. It's so the inversion of things. But I can't understand, it's the only explanation I can come up with, that why you would ally yourself in that way. And it is, you're right, deep down it's the devil, and deep down it's a hatred for the truth. But normally you're not saying, I know that's the truth and I reject it. There's only a few people that really do that. Most people are motivated by, I believe this is the good over here, our Enlightenment stuff. And the Catholic Church is actually the evil I must resist. It's the best motivator, because you don't need to do too much with people to get them moving to believe that. If you know who Sam Harris is, do you know who Sam Harris is? Well, I follow Sam Harris. He's a bright fellow. Well, when I say bright, he's clever enough, but he's not super bright in the sense that he doesn't understand the arguments for the existence of God and all of that. But when you hear him talk about religion, he sees religion this way. He talks about the craziness of Catholics who threaten people with hell, and he's very clever in the way that he lays out what he thinks Christianity is. It sounds like one huge game of manipulation. The way that Sam Harris, he's a very well-known YouTuber, atheist, clever, he paints Christianity as if it's the biggest mind manipulation of religion in the history of the world, including the other religions. But if you grow up, if you go to university and you get indoctrinated with that, no surprise you'll think the Catholic Church has got to be suppressed in some way. pushed to the side. You know, the Catholic Church did genocide against the, you know, the Indians in Canada, you know, all that fake news that all turned out to be rubbish. It wasn't true. They thought that there was 215 children buried in a mass grave and they burnt down churches, you know, all of those reactions. That's all coming out of this hatred, I think, that the Catholic Church was a source of oppression, racism, prejudice, colonialism, negativity, and ultimately evil.
That papers conversion then, Father. Imagine
Sure.
that. What would happen after that?
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. We've got to pray. And the only way out is evangelization. And Europe is in grave danger. The only way is to evangelize. Cardinal Sarah, just the other day, said the most obvious thing. The way to save Europe is to evangelize the Muslims. Make them Christian. Now, I know that's hard. That's super hard. But you've got to start. You've got to try. I suppose you could say, let's wake up the lukewarm Christians first, and then we get more of a coalition. But that may not happen. Anyway, so we're almost there. It's good. I think it's been a decent session.
A
Yep.
couple of thoughts.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the explanation. I think it was very helpful to think about homosexuality the way you explained it. But I wonder also, we have to consider other factors, that we live in a society that encourages both parents to work and encourages babies to be put into daycare from 3 months
Yep.
plus.
Yep.
And they don't see their parents, and
Yep.
most of the people in the daycares are often women.
Yep.
You don't get very many guys in there, and if
Yep.
you get guys, they're not always going to be
Yep.
the masculine sort, you know.
Yep. No, totally. And next week, it's the final session of the year, when we start to look at more the procreative, and we'll go through the church's teaching, the secondary part of the is education. Not just the church says have babies, but educate those babies. It's not just good enough to spit them out. You've got to educate them well and make them Catholic. And so this whole movement in the Western world to put the babies in daycare and go back to work, some women are in a tight situation, they kind of have to, but other women, yeah, the culture is encouraged it. And yeah, that's producing all of its own troubles in itself. And then the identity issues that come along with that. And then the IVF, there's identity issues around IVF babies. They all have the sense that somehow they're disconnected. And I've seen testimonies of children that have been conceived in test tubes. They have this haunting sense that something's missing. And I would say that's real. They were not conceived in the womb, where there's a loving environment that's alive, that's warm and welcoming. Yeah, they're in a cold petri dish. The beginning of their existence feels disconnected. I mean, so that's just what we'll look at that stuff, and we'll try to go into that, how a Catholic family is built properly.
Another thought I had is that I know of a person who thinks she's a lesbian, but I think most likely she was targeted and groomed by another lesbian to be kind of,
Sure.
because she's got autistic tendencies.
Sure, yeah, and I think women are more susceptible to that at one level. When I was in the seminary, the Metro magazine did an article on 2 or 3 of us seminarians, and I was one of them. So there was this article in the Metro magazine about us, and we're a bit worried because we're wondering how we're going to get painted. It was actually very fair. It was good. But in that same Metro, just after the article about us seminarians training to be priests, there was like a 5-page article about 7 lesbians, and talking, each of them giving their personal testimony about how they became lesbians. And I'll tell you what, there was a double-page spread of all these lesbians. They were all extremely beautiful women, feminine, curvaceous, all that stuff. Not the typical sort of idea of what you think of a lesbian. And so you're interested, you think, how did these women become lesbians? And so you read through it, and they were all said the same thing. They fell in love with the person. They first of all weren't attracted to women, and they developed the friendship. So it's category 1 in that list we were talking about, right? They had relationships with men, and quite successful ones, but they suddenly meet this woman that meets the maternal needs that they've somehow missed, and they kind of fall in love, and the body is less important. It's the person that they've encountered in a feminine way, and there they develop these lesbian relationships. And so it was a revelation to me, because you're normally thinking of the lesbians as these ones who are trying to be that second category, masculine, that kind of thing. And there, it wouldn't surprise me. And they all said, yeah, in the future I could easily go back to men, but at the moment I'm quite happy being in this relationship with a woman. So it was, and maybe they were bisexual. So there's also another kind of a gender componentry. Yeah, let's finish. Yeah, good topics. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Saint Joseph, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Thanks, everybody.